Everyone. I just wanted to quickly tell you I'm Kim Borman, Executive Director of the Boston Women's Workforce Council, and we are so excited for you all to be here for our inaugural industry-specific webinar for those involved in architecture, engineering, and real estate. We've been wanting to hold specific industry webinars for a while. You'll note that in 2021, it was the first time that we reported in our data collection on the wage gaps in different industries. And it's brought up a lot of questions and discussions when we've talked to you all one-on-one in the past couple of years. The hypothesis behind this industry-specific webinar is that you may very well have unique but similar issues because of the industry that you're in. And so this may be a way to transfer knowledge, share best practices, and also what doesn't work in a much more speedy fashion. So that's what our hope is today. I'm going to take like 30 seconds to explain to you what the Boston Women's Workforce Council is for those of you who don't know. We are a public-private partnership between the Boston mayor and greater Boston employers who are looking to close gender and racial wage gaps at their workplaces. We think of ourselves, and we want you to think of us, as a go-to resource if you're interested in and committed to this cause. It's really a first in the nation approach where we take city government and private sectors and they work together on this issue. And what we ask people to do is, you don't join the council necessarily. Lisa, one of our panelists, is a council member. We ask you to instead sign a compact, a pledge that says you are going to look at your gender and racial wage gaps, meaning you're going to do the math, and you're going to, if you see them, that you have some, you're going to work towards closing them. And we, in return, because you give us your data confidentially every 2 years, we are going to give you a benchmarkable wage gap metric, a community snapshot, if you will, that aggregates everybody's gender and racial wage gaps so that you can see how you're doing versus the other members of our compact.
Great. Thank you for that, Kim, that introduction. And thank you so much for everyone for attending our program today. First, I just want to kind of re-emphasize part of the compact and what we do here at the BWWC is facilitating programs such as this one today, really capture our goal to foster dynamic communities, employers who are committed to this unified effort to close the gender and racial wage gap in Greater Boston. It is in these spaces, I think, that really allows us to learn and share the challenges and opportunities and to drive and affect change as a unified front. The other way BWC has been able to further this unified effort is through our flagship initiative, as Kim just mentioned, our wage gap measurement program. This year, 2023, is our data collection year. But before I share more about our measurement program, we always like to begin by explaining how we calculate our gender and racial wage gap and how we encourage our employers to measure their gender and racial wage gap. We call it the raw wage gap, which is defined as the difference in average annual compensation between groups of employees across the organization. So for example, that is a comparison between all working men versus all working women, or all working white men versus all working Black African American employees. Why we say raw really means there's just no adjustment for the type of occupation, education, experience. Oftentimes, these are the criteria that are a product of discrimination and biases that has led to lower pay for many underrepresented groups. So calculating the raw wage gap allows us to go beyond what we call equal pay for equal work, as you can see here. Language really matters because I do think there's a critical distinction between equal pay and pay equity. Equal pay for equal work has been the law since 1963. It focused on whether individuals in the same position doing similar work are paid the same. Pay equity goes beyond that. I mean, it looks at equal pay for equal works, but it also looks at where underrepresented groups sits at an organization. It helps us to understand the power gaps that exist. What are the visible and invisible barriers that prohibit women or underrepresented groups from advancing, getting promoted, sitting in senior leadership position? Are there equitable opportunity in place to help advance and open up avenues for these individuals to be promoted. What are some of the systemic biases that creates these challenges for women, for marginalized groups from accessing these leadership roles? So for our wage gap measurement programs, again, we look at the raw gender and racial wage gap. Every 2 years, we report a community snapshot, as Kim mentioned, on their gender and racial wage gap in Greater Boston. You might have heard about the national gender wage gap. Our collection or our effort is a little bit different. The national wage gap looks at extensive data, which are derived from surveyed employees' response. For us, our data are directly from Greater Boston employers in I-495's payroll system. We believe it makes it for much more accurate reporting. We are actually housed at Boston University, who is not only our official sponsor, but also our data partner. So to ensure that the data that our employers or signers provide is confidential, anonymous, their privacy and security, the BWWC partnered with data scientists at the Boston University Software Application and Innovation Lab to implement multi-party computation in the data collection process. So MPC-backed software allows us to provide data, again, completely anonymous, but the minute you submit the data is actually automatically masked, split into randomized pieces, uploaded to different servers. What we see are just aggregated data, so we never see individual firm level data. And then we're able to perform analysis to report on several wage gap metrics. Our reporting captures several metrics using categories from the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission EO1 form. We collect information by gender and race of all full-time employees to report on wage gap metrics for compensation, performance pay, such as cash bonus, job category, and industry gaps. The full report, there'll be a link in the chat so you can look at our more fuller reporting. Here are just some of the 2021 report highlights. As I mentioned, we collect the data every 2 years. So 2023, we're looking forward to publishing our new data in December. But for our 2020 reporting, our sample size reflect almost 14% of employees and 81% of the industry in the Greater Boston workforce. And on your left, you can see one of the metrics that we look at is the average gender wage gap. Again, defined as the average difference in compensation between all working men and all working women. In Greater Boston, according to our select sample, Greater Boston has a gender wage gap is 30 cents. On the right, you can see the racial wage gap, which is the average difference between compensation for all working white employees and employees of color. And in Greater Boston, that is 24 cents. The middle metric is looking at the wage gap through an intersectional lens. So we know that oftentimes when identities intersect, like gender and race, disparities are compound. So according to our data sample, we see that Black, African American, and Hispanic and Latino women in Greater Boston experience some of the largest gender and racial wage gap at 51 cents and 55 cents respectively. So this really brings us to kind of where this salient conversation today. How do we achieve gender and racial equity in the workplace? Not only is reporting on the wage gap for us important to raise awareness, but we have seen over the years and working with many partners in this effort, is the driving force that really sparked action from employers to implement policy and to think critically about what that means. And we have seen employers who've signed the pledge and beyond being able to do this. So first, without further ado, I want to really introduce our all-star panelists today. I'm very fortunate to be able, for the last couple months, to work with each of these individuals. First, we have Janina Boy-Ashiva, who is our participatory moderator. Janina joined Lear's Winsefeld Associate in 2014, contributing to the design of several campus and infrastructure projects, including the Harvard University District Energy Facility. And not only is Janina a passionate architect, but she's also a staunch equity advocate. Being one of the office leaders in equity and diversity, she led the firm effort to receive just labels, and also co-founded Girl Uninterrupted project with fellow colleague Juliet Chung, aiming to bridge the gap between emerging professionals and leaders in architecture. The project has been internationally recognized and awarded the 2019 Beverly Willis Tribune Award. Also representing Lear's Winsefeld Associate is Kevin Bell. Kevin has been with LWA for 16 years and recently been appointed as the associate principal there. Kevin leads the firm technology integration process. He is very passionate about technology and building, and most recently discussing advanced glazing as part of Architecture Records webinar series. Because of his commitment to creating and supporting equity to promote the success of each of the valuable member within his firm, Kevin actually heard about the Boston Women's Workforce Council and was kind of the leading force to having LWA sign the pledge in 2018. He really wanted the firm to kind of work with local efforts that mirrors the firm's own goals for pay equity. Our third panelist is our very own Boston's Women's Workforce Council member, Lisa Brother. Lisa is the CEO and president of Niche Engineering with over 30 years of experience in the design, construction, management, roadways, site development, sustainable design, infrastructure-related project. Lisa really brings to Niche the vision and strategic direction. She's a registered professional engineer in Massachusetts, 5 other states. Lisa is involved in a wide range of professional activities. Actively right now, she's involved with the American Council of Engineering Companies Massachusetts chapter for more than 25 years. Lisa currently is the National Director and on the Government Affairs Committee. She's also a past president of the chapter. Last but certainly not least is Amy Court, who really is the one who helped spearhead this panel. Thank you, Amy. Amy is the president of Arrow Street, leading much of the firm's residential work, also mixed use and commercial project in Boston, Cambridge, Worcester, and Revere. Amy leads much of the research thinking at Arrow Street and launched the firm's virtual reality, augmented reality studio. She is the recipient of the Banker and Tradesman Award for Women in Real Estate, which recognizes Massachusetts women who demonstrate talent, ambition, innovation, and philanthropy. So now I bring you Janina, who will lead us in the conversation on the pathways of achieving gender and racial equity in architecture, real estate, and engineering.
Thank you so much, Cindy, and thank you, Kim, and the whole team for the amazing work that you do. It's very exciting to start focusing on the specific industries, and I'm excited to share this discussion with everybody. And we have a wonderful group of panelists, and we're going to focus on 3 quick key questions, followed up by discussion by the audience. And I loved what Kim said, to think about what works, but also what doesn't work in all these efforts that we do. So we all can learn together on this kind of efforts. We're going to start with a little bit more general question on equity. So equity has been really in the spotlight of many professions, and definitely within the architecture industry. There's efforts such as the BWWC to collect the database and have specific metrics to look at. There's the National American Institute of Architects, who in 2020 published the Guides for Equitable Practice. And of course, the local chapter, Boston Society for Architecture, which kind of did a spin-off in 2020 on its own equity and practice resource guide. These are wonderful resources for, if you haven't looked at them, they have action items for individuals, for firms, for the profession at large. There's also the JUST label that was mentioned, which is through the International Living Future Institute, a wonderful framework of really rethinking policies at the workplace. So I will open it up to the panelists with the question: what concrete example has your firm done to achieve your equity goals? And one particular industry challenge is we deal with different scales of firms. So when you introduce yourself in the beginning, maybe you can mention what size firm you work in, just to give you that perspective. And we can start with Amy and then passing on to Kevin and Lisa for this question.
Hi, everyone. So we are approximately 70 to 80 person firm based in Boston. So we have one office, so kind of that mid-sized firm. And we really, we try to look at equity from a holistic lens. So when I joined Arrow Street 15 years ago, the firm, and one of the reasons I joined the firm was it was just really family friendly, both in terms of maternity leave, small things like welcoming kids into the office during family vacation week, like the one we're on. And then out of all my friends who were working at the time, and we all graduated, you know, from design schools where we stayed up and pulled all those all-nighters. I felt like Arrow Street was one of the few that really didn't pressure you and made you feel guilty for not working on weekends or leaving early to pick up your kids. And so we signed the Boston Women's Workforce Compact in 2016. And the reporting that we've done every year has really prompted us to have those larger and more holistic conversations around not just the wage gap, but then pay equity across the different levels within the firm and within the different studios. So we have interior design and graphic design, which also has kind of different nuances that we wanted to measure. One thing we learned pretty quickly was it wasn't enough to just sign the compact. We thought we were doing a great thing. Great, we're one of the first architecture firms to sign this. And then we went a few years before, as partners, we ended up asking our CFO, well, what's the data really telling us? And so we actually had a little bit of a gap ourselves in terms of we reported the data, but we didn't necessarily look at it in detail to really look at how we could use the data to inform our yearly compensation that we did. And so based on those evaluations, and after we started asking Nancy, our CFO, what is this really telling us, and how can it prompt us to ask broader questions in terms of measuring the compensation and the pay equity across the firm, we got our gender pay gap, which really looked at the different levels of experience down to a 5 cents difference in, I think it was the end of 2019, and then we closed that in 2020. But what we found is really that raw wage gap doesn't necessarily follow the the pay equity, the equal pay for equal work. And so we're still about, I think, 8 to 10 cents off. We kind of oscillate depending on the levels of employees that we bring in. Back in 2020. And so, we were doing that reporting. And then the other thing, as Janina mentioned, is when the AIA guides for equitable practice came out, specifically the one around compensation, it gave us a larger framework to really evaluate many of the things that we were already doing as a firm. So looking at pay equity through that holistic lens, so not just looking at salary and bonus, but also things like stretch assignments. How are we giving employees opportunities to grow their career, mentoring, obviously the paid time off, and then those conference travel opportunities, leadership opportunities. And so one of our goals this year is to put it all together in a much more kind of data-driven way and start to map out across the firm what are those additional opportunities that we're giving employees based on the AIA equity guides, and then combine that with the Boston Women's Workforce reporting.
I guess I'll just pick up on that, Amy. The Women's Workforce Council reporting that data, I think, we're small as compared to, I still say we're mid-sized, but we're about 35 or so folks in Boston, our single office. And, at our size, we don't have an HR department per se. We have accounting. We have Josiah Stevenson, principal in our office, who does a lot of HR related tasks. So for us, that reporting and then the just certification that Janina led means that I think now annually we do have to look at pay and our pay equity. I think biannually for just, and then biannually for Women's Workforce Council. And what that's done is, even in times, I think previously we were really good at, as I understand it, kind of pay equity and assessing value when we were growing and we were hiring folks and we were looking at salaries and comparing them both within the firm and outside the firm in the industry. But there's times when you're not growing so much. And, I think our wages would get a little more mixed up in those times because, some folks are really good at advocating for themselves and others, aren't, or, don't feel comfortable doing that. So I think just the reporting and having to address the data on an annual basis has been really valuable for us in maintaining pay equity. We've always been pretty good at that, I think. For me, a little bit, I started at Lear's after grad school. It's been the place I've been. So in some respects, I look at this panel and this discussion is, a bit of a reflection of me coming up through. I wasn't always responsible for salaries and who was paid what, but I could kind of see both as a designer kind of outside the management role, now moving into it, some consistency. I have to admit, at one point I was actually, my salary was adjusted because folks were hired at a higher salary and I'd done a poor job of negotiating my salary. So we've been good in that respect. I think from an equity standpoint, something that has been really useful to us the last 18 months or so, and my colleague Ashley Rowe, and Shanina's colleague as well, the Massachusetts Workforce Training Fund, which provides funds to pay for training across the board. There are some eligibility requirements, but that has allowed us to basically facilitate training and opportunities for staff across the board. And in preparation for it and in writing that grant, what we were able to do is reach out to everyone in the office and ask what sort of tools, training and other kind of help would be a value. And we were able to roll that in, and we're now, I think we have just 1 quarter left, and we've had pretty good participation in those courses, which are both, specifically architecture related, but also related to, presentation skills, management skills, and other items that have been really useful.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here with us today. This is a really important topic and something that I'm very personally passionate about. I've been on the Boston Workforce Council since 2016. We one of the first original compact signers, and just really passionate about this issue. As you can imagine, our company, Niche Engineering, is about 125 people. We have 4 offices, 3 in Massachusetts, 1 in DC. The history of the company, we've always paid attention to equal pay for equal work. We've always had a spreadsheet that we would compare different within wage bands, within categories of positions, and make sure that when our managers are putting forward promotions, that the board of directors actually looks through, it's actually the executive committee looks through to make sure, why is that person getting this much? What about this person? And where do they stand within that wage band? And so people understand where they stand. And so we were always really good about equal pay for equal work. The thing that I learned when I joined the council was the raw wage gap. That was something that we weren't tracking. And that was something that was like, oh, that's interesting. And I love the fact that everything the council does is based on actual data. It's actual data that we're providing. And if we can get more people to actually engineering firms and real estate firms and architectural firms to submit, the council can slice and dice the data that they get and give us a snapshot of our industry. But we need a certain level of people willing to participate and share that information, because we need obviously you can't slice it, there's only a limited number. I think we need at least 8 firms to be able to give the data out per our industry. So I've personally been working really hard to get engineering firms to also join the council. So the raw wage gap, I know Cindy did a great job explaining it, but it's really something that you really should do and look at. And with the companies, it does fluctuate, because if you have a smaller company, if somebody leaves depending on their position. But what it made me really do, and one of the concrete things that we've done here at Niche because of measuring the raw wage gap, is that I've now added to that complex spreadsheet that tells me everything about people's education, their wage bands, is when the last time they were promoted. And so part of the conversation is, okay, this person is up for promotion. So, but why isn't this person? This person's been in that position longer than this person. Please explain to me why this person is not the person that's getting promoted. And I think that's really one concrete thing that I can say doing the raw wage gap has changed here at Niche. So, and then the other things that we do that are concrete examples, we've been passionate about this for a long time, became very intentional with our DEI efforts. We have a council for equity, diversity, and inclusion for the company, which is corporate. We have our ERGs, of course, that are our groups that feed back up to the council so we can take action, looking at all of our policies and all of the things that are important. And we're in the middle of doing our JUST application. So hopefully we'll have a JUST label sometime in the near future, but it really takes commitment from the top, I think, to really move the needle on wage equity and having different tools, looking at your raw wage gap, providing your data, allowing us to have a broader sense of what's happening in our community. is super critical. So I hope if you aren't a compact signer that you consider signing. It's only every other year. The team makes it very easy to submit the data. It's very confidential. And it's really something that will help elevate our industry if we can get some really concrete numbers. So.
Thank you, Lisa, and everybody. I think this idea of collecting data and sharing it and building a common platform for discussion that from which we can jumpstart additional questions and really understanding and delving further into data is very important. And Lisa mentioned, and I think Amy and Kevin all mentioned the JUST label, and I still want to do a little pitch on, if you're not familiar with this, this is basically a holistic framework of rethinking office policies, which are, there's ideas for compensation, but it's also kind of a larger really framework for thinking about it. And it's a large effort to get a JUST label, and it becomes a big effort within the company to really reflecting on daily practices within the firm. And talking about equity at large, I know Amy started with kind of a more personal narrative of how she selected the firm, which also had to do with the office culture of being able to manage a life or families with other things. So I think when we talk about equity at large, I do encourage everybody to think about other than the wage gap, what other office policies and how do you build an equitable culture? What are those mentorship opportunities, such as Kevin mentioned, the training? How do you incorporate these and evaluate, being able to offer a platform for everybody to grow and develop in the firm? And we can always answer at the end. We'll have open-ended questions. If you have any specific questions about the JUST label, the spreadsheets, we will please, we welcome your questions. We want to be as helpful as possible. And moving on to a little more focus on money. I know money is really an uncomfortable subject, I think, in architecture, and there's a lot of murky kind of lines when it comes to defining a role within the firm. The American Institute of Architects provides usually a database based on different areas and regions on how you compare what are some of the firm wages. Those personally were always a little difficult for me to understand, assessing where you are within a firm and what your position is, because every firm depends on the different scales of firms. We deal with different roles and different definitions of what is expected. There are different kind of cultural expectations about length of hours at the workplace, which affects the money at the end. There are different kind of standards, different benefits that are offered, and some of those soft skills that were mentioned in terms of mentoring and really letting somebody grow within the firm are, again, challenging to put a dollar sign on. So my question to the panelists now is, what policies or approaches your firm has incorporated to bridge the pay gaps? I know some of you have already started mentioning this, but if you can go into more details about those spreadsheets that you use to evaluate the situation, what questions you ask, what are some questions around bonuses at the end, retention of people or promoting people. I think these are all very valuable when it comes to understanding the wage gap. And we can start, maybe Lisa, you can start first to this, and then Amy and Kevin.
Sure. So as I mentioned, it's something that our company has been critically attentive to over the history of the company. And I talked about those wage bands, which are super important when you're talking about people in certain positions. I will say that we all have to remember that the younger generation share their salaries. So if anybody thinks that what people are being paid is a secret, I think that you have to realize that that's no longer the case. And it's against the law when you interview people to ask them what they're currently making. So the whole dynamic around the conversation of salaries is definitely changing and loosening up. And so I think if you don't pay attention to what you're paying for people and equal pay for equal work, or at least be able to explain to somebody that, yes, if someone comes to you and so is making this much money, you understand this is what the lowest person in this range makes, and this is what the highest person makes, and this is why you're like right here, and this is what we do. This is what you need to do to move forward. and to get to that next level. And what we actually just started creating was actual career pathing. So we always had job descriptions, but now the younger staff really wants to know what it takes to go to the next level. And so we have actual career pathing for each position that will show them how to move from a project designer. What's the next skill sets they need for a senior project designer? What do they need for a PE, a senior PE, a project manager? What's the technical track versus the project management track? So when you talk about salary, you pull out the job description, this career pathing, and say, these are the things you're doing really well. These are the things you need to be, and this is why you're here. And so those are the conversations we have around salary. And I think the career pathing, which we just started doing, because people were asking, they really want to know, how do we advance? And thought if we put it on paper and really had that document as part of the conversation, I think it's made it much easier to have those conversations with the younger generation in particular, who are very much, have lots of conversations about their salaries.
Yeah, we use a very similar format to Lisa's Excel spreadsheet. Well, just everyone knows Excel, it's very easy. I love her idea of putting in the last, date of promotions. One thing we realized, as Kevin mentioned, as a lot of us are part of firms that have been around for 50 plus years in Boston, and you inherit a set of policies that you then, as you come into ownership or principal level, you need to just take a fresh set of eyes to and start questioning. And so one thing we realized when myself and 3 other people here became partners 5 or so years ago, we looked at how the bonuses were being given out at the end of every year and realized that it was a percentage. The percentage, your bonus was based on a percentage of your hours worked, which was crazy. So if you, put in a ton of overtime, or if you were extremely inefficient with your work, you were actually getting rewarded for that and getting a higher bonus. And so we asked the question, is this really fair? Is this equitable? You can have, and it was actually hurting a lot of our women in the firm who either worked a lot of hours but didn't report it because they didn't want to overburden the project with the hours and the fees worked, or were actually really extremely efficient in their jobs, worked 40 hours, got their work done and went home. And so we changed that. It actually did wonders for closing our gaps. So something as simple as looking at what are the policies you inherit from previous firm owners who have just done it that way forever. As well as just continuing to evaluate and question it. As Kevin said, we all go through these cycles of, growth, different recessions, and being able to both question that on a yearly basis, but also look at it on the fly, but without, rewarding the people who are just negotiating for the salary. So if somebody comes to us to say, I think I need a raise, it's not just, we can't just say yes or no to that one person. You have to then bracket it out to that broader range of levels. And so like Lisa said, we have a range, and we look at the titles that we give. We wrote out our roles and responsibilities last year for that very similar reason, realizing that the generation that was graduating, as well as kind of our associate level employees, really wanted a clear definition of what their role should be, what their career path should be. And we felt like getting that to paper, and it's still a work in progress. We're not going to wordsmith it right perfectly the first time, but getting something out was better than not having anything.
Yeah, I think we are due for a look at our roles and responsibilities for each job category. I think one thing we, as a firm, we've done a good job of is I think we've actually reduced the number of job categories within the firm, which, we're, again, relatively small. So if you have too many job categories, you end up with 1 or 2 people in them, which, is in one way is great because everyone has a unique set of skills and talents, and you want to, reward them appropriately. But at the same time, it's a double-edged sword where it lets you basically avoid some, difficult discussions about where people fit. So I think we've done a good job of adhering to a limited set of job titles and maintaining equity within those job titles, rather than, using titles in lieu of salary increases or otherwise. I think that's something we've done well. I do think going forward, a big thing we want to be able to do is be more transparent. And I think what we struggle with most is if we only have 1 or 2 people in a job category, then if they wish for their salary to be confidential or less public, it's hard to do that at the same time you're providing transparency about all the job categories. So I'd love from Amy or Lisa or anyone else on this webinar, if they have ideas about how we can better maintain both, you know, kind of confidence and privacy around salaries for those that want to have it, but be more transparent with others that really want to know where they stand. I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, it's difficult. We only have a couple of people in a title for sure. So I think you either you're all in or you're not in. I don't know if you can be half and half. I just want to, one thing that Amy said, I just want to also talk about is with the inflation that we're having and the really pressure on salaries. One of the things that we've done, and we've done over the history of the company, is really I refuse to bring in an unknown into our company and not uplift the stars that we have here. And so we have made mid-cycle adjustments to salaries because just for that reason, you know, we don't want to have anybody, we're pretty transparent here. We don't want anybody to think that you know, they're loyal to us and they've been here forever and we know they're superstars and we're not going to give them what they deserve as far as pay. So we've done equity adjustments mid-cycle because of what the market's doing too. And I think that's an appropriate way to handle your staff and be fair and equitable about it.
Thank you all. There's some really valuable kind of questions and case studies that you provided. And Amy used kind of an expression, a work in progress, which I think everything is a work in progress. And it's a constant kind of discussion and evaluating of each practice. So maybe the last question that I'm going to pause is on an impact or how we evaluate some changes that we have done. How do we measure an impact of a new policy? And maybe Kevin, you can start this one off, and then Lisa and Amy.
Sure. I mean, we've talked about, I think for us, the two biggest are the reporting for both the compact and reporting for just. That has really been, I think, the most effective way for us to measure our progress. I think, quite frankly, we weren't measuring our progress frequently enough. And that's what basically has provided the data that allows us to look at things. Trying to think other sorts of things that allow us to measure. I don't know if we have good employee retention, but I don't know if we track that well enough. And I think that's probably something we could do a better job of is tracking and trying to find ways to measure our efforts a little better.
I might just jump in because I work with Kevin on something that we also often do is over the last few years, we've been very kind of conscious on hiring new people and how we hire new employees and making sure that it's a diversity. So we have charts over like since 2020 that looks at gender, but also at ethnicity and what the percentages are. And we're quite proud to see a focus on really extending kind of the diversity within the office when it comes to race and really starting to track that in more details and how the wage is related to that. And that's just one example of how we're tracking things. And we have also expanded a lot our initiatives in terms of education and leading various summer programs, summer schools, and having internal office questionnaires of how we are performing on different things. Here, again, the anonymity becomes a problem because we are a smaller scale firm. So that's something that we're kind of battling with when it comes to sharing and transparency. Sorry, giving the microphone back to Lisa.
That's okay. things that we do, and we've been doing for a long time, is our council for EDI. We actually track year-end metrics, so we have a benchmark that we measure ourselves against in a lot of different metrics. And we share that with the whole company once a year at our year-end company meeting, where we go over the finances as well as how we're performing around EDI. We do a cultural values assessment for the company every other year, so people can see if we're living our values, which include a lot of things around ethics and equity and diversity and walking the talk around work-life balance and all of those kinds of things. Of course, we sign the compacts. We look at our data through there. We're putting forward for the JUST certification. And then the off years that we do, the CVA, we do an internal niche survey that basically, because the cultural values assessment is an external instrument, we do an internal instrument that dives a little bit deeper into some of the DEI topics. So that's always interesting to see how that comes back. So we're always surveying and asking our team, are we doing the right things for you all? And really appreciate their feedback, listen, and then tell them what we heard, whether good, bad, or indifferent. We don't whitewash what we hear. We tell them what we heard. And of course, submitting for a top place to work every year and making that list is something that I'm really proud of, because that's 75% of that ranking is based on what employees say about your company. So so all of those instruments kind of help us guide the company to be who we are and how we care about our people and how we want to be a place where people want to be, and they all understand what we're trying to accomplish and help us get there.
Yeah, I would just add, I mean, similar to Lisa, we do a lot of surveys. The latest one was around hybrid work. So kind of understanding kind of that balance between flexibility and being in the office versus, being remote. One thing that we've done in the last few years, and especially as we've worked on more larger, more complex projects around the Massport model, right, where you're partnering with W and MBE firms across the spectrum, so not just as architects, but as engineers. One thing we've been trying to measure over the duration of those projects for those of us in those firms who are not MWBEs can you measure a change within the internal demographics of the firm to show that when you start the project and when the project is completed, opened, and built and at major milestones, are there measurable and quantifiable opportunities for women, people of color who have taken on those stretch assignments, those leadership opportunities within the project teams. And Parcel H down in the Seaport is kind of one of our good examples of this. We have basically an all-women structural mechanical engineering team through Maxal and Arup who are leading that project internally. We're being led by primarily a woman team in-house. And so how do those opportunities for that type of complex project lead to promotions, lead to the career pathing that Lisa talked about earlier, and really being intentional about the projects and then the support we offer to the employees to do the projects, about how that can really influence and grow their careers, because I think that's really important. And then how are they getting both the training, the mentoring opportunities, but then there's also those speaking opportunities, the media around it, and those opportunities to speak. So it's not just me speaking about the project, but the project team is representing and speaking about the project. And so that's something that is still a work in progress, but we're again trying to get that data around it. I mean, I shipped off again that Excel file to all of our engineering partners. Report back your data, and then let's do it when CDs are issued, and then let's do it when the project opens, so that there can be change within those of us who are not necessarily MWBEs, and can you create those pathways for that greater diversity at the top?
Great, thank you so much. At this point, I think I would open it up to everybody to ask questions. Feel free to write it in the chat group or unmute if you're brave enough.
And I would just say, I think we have such a great community of architects and engineers in Boston that just aren't afraid of sharing ideas and learning from each other. I think it's just a really wonderful, wonderful way for us to get those ideas and that mentorship as leaders of firms too.
Hi, my name is John Caldwell. I'm with Paradigm Properties, and I want to commend all of you for being on this and the BWWC for holding it. I was intrigued with Amy's comment that some of her, it became obvious that some of her teammates are more and less efficient than others, and I'd be interested, sort of a two-part question. Number one, how does any comments on how she explains to those employees that are less efficient their efficiency, and number two, is there a line on the spreadsheet for effort or intangible contributions? We have various committees in our company that are, like a culture committee, a DE&I committee, a corporate giving committee that's in charge of deciding where the company makes its donations, and employees that choose to be on those committees and make extra effort toward the company. How do you measure that, and how is that intangible effort quotient measured? Thanks.
Yeah, those are both really great questions. I think maybe to broaden it out from efficiency, because I think there's both efficiency and then there's have we staffed the project well, right and correctly. So we're getting the labor reports on a weekly basis, and so if we find that somebody is putting in 50 hours, 60 hours a week on a regular basis, and they don't have a deadline that's coming up, we go over and we have an immediate conversation with that person, that team, and first try to tackle it from, have we staffed this project well? Do you just need another person on your job because you're doing too much work? And typically the efficiency question comes around, this is something that's repeated over the course of several years, and it's not something that we can correct with those conversations or as a staffing problem. And so I don't think we've actually done a really nice job in the last few years where our overtime is fairly minimal, and those issues are not occurring because you see it affect the person and a lot of their personal lives as well, their family life, and it's not healthy for them on a personal level, and it's not healthy for us as a firm. I think the committees is actually a really great question. I think it's something every couple of years we realize our committees and groups kind of balloon up into these like things that we can't keep their goals and what they're trying to do every year in our heads. And so when that happens, we go through this exercise of, all right, come into management. Let's look holistically again at what are you trying to accomplish in the committees and groups, and let's figure out how to prioritize that, because many times we've found that the committee work that's gotten missed and that hasn't been valued by the firm are ones where either that committee or that individual or two people aren't then reporting back and don't have a good thread to management that then allows us to say, maybe you want to focus your efforts on something else, or maybe you should put your time into the project work, or, oh, that's great, you've done this, let's use that. So it's a continuous conversation and something that I think is a really good idea for us to actually measure more intentionally as part of our master spreadsheet too. Thank you for that.
I can talk to you how we look at the intangibles, because as I used to know, like you said, Amy, like who is doing what. And the bigger you get, you can't keep a pulse on that. So one things we do for our year-end meeting I just talked about is that we actually put a call out to everybody in the company and say, please tell us what you're doing for leadership positions internally to the company, if you're a leader of an internal committee, or if you're external on a committee or a board. And then everybody gets, we call them, everybody gets a year-end award for what they participate in. And we share that with the whole company. And that gives me a really good sense of what everybody's doing. And I'm always surprised. I'm like, oh, that person just got on their local conservation commission. I had no idea that. And then with that information comes in handy is that intangible gets rewarded in the bonus conversation. Our bonus discussion has what are people doing in leadership roles within the company and outside externally. So, but that's the way we gather the information, and we celebrate what people are doing, and we give them a little bit of a year-end spot bonus. at that time when we announce it, and then it really plays into when we were figuring out, year-end bonuses for the staff. What are those intangibles, those people that are doing the little bit extra above and beyond? So that's the way we've been intentional about capturing it.
Lisa, I think you just added a question to our annual review questionnaire.
It's great. Just celebrate it. Our receptionist captures all the information. She sends it out. And then I always do a caveat. If your name's not up here, that means that you've been asked 3 times and you didn't put your stuff forward. So I don't want to hear about it after the fact. And so these are the people that reported out, and they all get like a $100, we call them chits, they give us a little bit of a spot bonus, and then that's captured for all of the year-end conversations. But celebrate the good things that people are doing, and it's a good way to be informed about what they're doing.
Yeah, and I would say we're trying to balance that because we recognize some of our project architects are just like amazing PAs. They, get the projects done. They, look out for the interests of the firm and CA. The clients love them, but for them, some of them just aren't participating in committees. They don't want to. That's not their thing. And so trying to balance that as well and reward that, I think is something that's important to us too.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Too.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question, John. Any other questions? I think somebody raised Diana.
Yep. I have a question. So Diana Linsemeyer, I'm a principal at DeMille Schaefer, which is a firm very similar to Air Street. So maybe my question is more directed to Amy. I'm really fascinated by this raw wage gap. And sort of, I can imagine that our firm is going to have a gap simply based on the demographics of leadership. I mean, we've been around for 50 years as well, and that's changing. But so I guess my specific question is, how do you tackle that? Do you have sort of a multi-year goal to reduce that over time, to get more diversity in leadership? Or how do you like just year by year, or do you say in 5 years we're going to close this to, I don't know, 5 cents? How do you handle that?
I would say ours is still very much a year by year, and I was looking at the numbers the other week with our CFO around the raw racial gap, and I think what we were realizing is we've, out of grad school, and I wonder too if this is specific to our industry, we support a lot of H-1B and the visas, and so we track our demographics of the firm based on both like how is it representative of the communities we work in, Boston, and then AIA reports out a broader series of demographic percentages for firms too, and so we kind of benchmark it against both of those, and we are definitely above average in terms of supporting Asian employees. But then when you look at the raw racial wage gap, we're actually more on par with like what Boston is. So that's our highest gap right now. And I don't have a good answer of how you work towards minimizing that, other than, again, going back to the career pathing and how do we support growth of employees and the mentorship of employees through firms. And so we're doing things like, how do we give our incredibly talented designers who love kind of the ownership that they get over design, younger levels of the firm, because we've gone from, the designer in charge model. I forget exactly what it's called, but we used to have like a project designer that was kind of setting the design standard for the entire company, to one that's much more dispersed and non-hierarchical in order to elevate up a more diverse set of voices and create better designs, quite frankly, than when I joined the firm. And then really trying to be intentional about giving those designers kind of at all levels, but especially that level that's typically entitled, room to grow. And I don't think we've been at it long enough to see that change. However, we did make a whole series of title adjustments last fall where, our senior associates, our associate principals, we brought back that title, are now definitely more equal in terms of the gender gap. So I think that's what I'm curious about is are there certain things in our data that are specific very much to our industries? Because I don't think the real estate industry has that same H-1B and visa support that we do and we give to our employees.
Thank you.
Let's talk more, Diana, because I don't have the answer.
Amy, you touched on something we're looking forward to tackling. And as Janina mentioned, we've had better success hiring minority employees and staff. And so, broadly within the firm, greater diversity. But how do we, and traditionally the way we've hired is we hire young people. I think Janina, you started out of grad school with the firm, and I did. So that's kind of our trajectory. But what it does mean is that most of our minority studio members are young designers. And so how do we make sure that we kind of keep our feet to the fire and advance folks in a way that we know that, immediately the wages are not going to be equal, but how do we keep at that year in, year out to make sure we're getting to a better place each year? That's something I don't know yet, but I know in conversations with Janina and Josiah within the firm, it's been a question of, I think we're pleased to start to have that problem in some senses. It's but it's something we know we have to be really focused on going forward.
I think we have a couple more minutes for any final questions. Maybe one final question. Any takers? Maybe I will ask if somebody has a particular one challenge that you will kind of commit to try and tackle or moving forward. Maybe that was a big question.
Janine, I did want to pick up on something Lisa mentioned, and I think bears repeating is, I think within our industry and BSA, with their kind of strength as organizations for our profession, we do a good job within the industry. But what's really exciting about Cindy and Kim and Renee and Boston Women Workforce Council is that it puts us in the context of the Boston community, within our local community, and how hopefully we can start to measure ourselves against that. And I don't think it's, I think we will do well. I hope. But I think it also is an opportunity for us to demonstrate within Boston that we are a collection of employers and companies that embrace diversity and equity, particularly equity. And hopefully that encourages young people in Boston to go into our profession, because hopefully better place to work, more equitable, more diverse. And so it's an opportunity for us to get out of our specific industry groups and be a part of our local community.
And I'll just say in closing, obviously, if you haven't signed the compact, please do so. We really need your data. But the thing that you have to remember, I just want to put it in context. People that sign the compact are firms that care about these issues. And the data is from firms that care about this issue. And we still have a huge wage gap. So imagine if we got all the firms that didn't care about this issue in the database, what it would look like. So we have a lot of work to do and a long way to go. And so the more people we can educate around measuring their raw wage gap, paying attention to the council, getting more data in, hopefully we can make change. But I just wanted to remind people of that the people that have signed the compact are the people that truly care about this. And we're still coming back with some the numbers that need to have a lot of work to do, I guess is what I'll say.
Thanks, Lisa. This is a great kind of final call to action. And yes, we do have the power like to educate both with consultants and clients. And I think sharing all those resources and those ways of committing yourself to really focus on that issue is essential. Cindy or Kim, I don't know if you want to do any.
Janina, Amy, Lisa, Kevin, and just thank you. And I've seen so many of our other compact signers in the industry that joined the conversation. Thank you too. Lisa, thank you for summarizing everything. We're looking forward to continuing this conversation. Please feel free to connect in the chat. We've left down a lot of resources in that link. And the last thing I want to leave with, and I don't want to take up any more time, is we did develop a free and public tool called a wage gap calculator. So even if you're not a signer, please feel free to explore the wage gap calculator tool, and we'll put the link again in the chat just so you have it readily there. The tools allowed you to measure your raw wage gap and compare it next to our aggregated. But this is an exciting year as we're heading into our 5th data measurement. So we hope to see some new faces in our compact. Thank you. Bye, everyone.